In 2016, cable TV host and artist Rory Silk suffered what appeared to be a mental breakdown. Over the last few episodes of his show, Let's Paint with Rory Silk, his artwork and his rambling narration became more and more deranged. Then one day, he disappeared. Co-workers entered his home to look for him, and they immediately called the police. There were no bodies, but there was a lot of blood. Blood in paint cans and jars and little plastic paint palettes. He had left behind a gallery full of sinister paintings, of an island of deformed monsters devouring human flesh, and of a priest with no face but bright red hands. Rory Silk had been trying to blend blood with paint to find the perfect shade of red. The official statement from the police spokesman was, and I quote, "There were at least 15 different unique blood samples on the premises, but there could be as many as 4 or 5 times that many. We really aren't sure," unquote. There was a brief, futile manhunt, and Rory Silk was never seen again. Before long, people stopped looking. With all the blood, could never trace it to a missing person or a victim. With no bodies and no murder, there was no crime. It was just an unusual circumstance. Stories abound that Mr. Silk had been in possession of a legendary painting, a notorious piece of art that traces its origin and its curse to one of the most sadistic killers in history. I'm Mary Anne Simpson, and this is an investigation into the history of the Ravenous One.
Drinking whiskey in the kitchen and telling scary stories around the fire. Music, monsters, and mayhem, killers, cannibals, and cults, fearful fiction and furious fact, tall tales, and terrible truths. This is a scary home companion.
Throughout the 1950s, long before the Manson murders or the Satanic Panic, Ira Dunwich was the most notorious occultist in America. Reputedly affiliated with several religious factions, criminal organizations, and cults, Dunwich was not just a killer, he was a mastermind. He organized other killers. He gave them purpose. He long had fancied himself an artist, using the human body for his raw materials. But not always. His most lasting contribution to the world was his painting, The Ravenous One. According to the lore, he mixed blood or flesh of the devil into his paints to give this piece of artwork a dark power. So fearsome was his reputation that other notable occultists made a public display of condemning him. Anton LaVey himself once commented that no Satanist of any integrity or intelligence would listen to such a deranged man. His reign of terror came to an end at daybreak on September 16th, 1960. Police found him in the basement of his remote Pennsylvania farmhouse, along with several victims both living and dead. For the next 14 years, Ira Dunwich sat on death row at Slate County Correctional Facility. But the painting was still out in the world. It was difficult to put together a timeline, but in the 60s, there was an explosion of documented sightings of the Ravenous One. It was found in the federal raid of a hippie commune in upstate Washington, at the scene of a triple homicide in Havana, Cuba, and in crime scenes in Miami, Atlanta, and Knoxville. Most famously, there was the church fire in New Orleans in 1968, The entire building burned to the ground except for this painting and the wall it was hanging on. That remained untouched. The following year, it was found in an art gallery in Soho by police investigating the suicide of the gallery owner. Since it wasn't evidence, the detective took it home with him. He never came back to work. And there are no stories for a few years, until the most infamous of them all, the Bel Air blood orgy of 1975. Sebastian Kurtz is the author of several books on the dark side of the music industry. Most recently, he published The Devil's Music, The Connection Between Metal and the Occult. In this book, there is an entire chapter devoted to the infamous party. Hosted by a music producer and concert promoter, it began as a viewing party for the painting and evolved into something more horrific. Mr. Kurtz is a fascinating man, but a bit extreme. I wanted to present his story to you as completely as I could, but certain horrific details have been censored. This isn't sensationalism, this is journalism.
For anyone that doesn't know the story with this painting, the Ravenous One, is that if you stared at it long enough, you could see through it into hell. Great reason to have a party, right? A viewing party for the world's most dangerous artwork, hosted by one of the music industry's elite. The host was a music producer, a concert promoter, and the venue was his upscale Beverly Hills mansion. The guest list was the A-list, a veritable who's who of rock musicians, movie stars, and the top occultists in Southern California. Now that I've set the stage for you, let's get into the real shit, shall we? By your request, Mary Anne, I am not mentioning any of these people by name. But if you know absolutely anything about 1970s music culture at all, you would know each and every one of them. The first edition of my book named names, and 3 lawsuits later, it now has fake names. So yeah, I get it. Along with the elites, there were groupies, whores, hookers, drug dealers, and a handful of Hell's Angels that were hired to watch the door. The first night, it's a pretty, shall we say, debaucherous party. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, the kind of party that would make the Marquis de Sade jealous. By the time the sun comes up, a lot of the elites had left, but not all of them. There were now about 30 people left, give or take, depending on who you ask, and most of them were still the escorts on the clock. That's when everything got real. They sealed up the room, covered the windows, broke the mirrors, and smashed the lights. The drug use had hit the roof, and now we're at the point where it's turning into a satanic orgy. But they hit a problem. They were out of lube. Major orgy killer, right? The host says the painting gave him a great idea, an endless supply of lube so they never run out. Walks up to one of the women, goes to kiss her, but instead bends over, takes her nipple into his mouth, and bites. Through the nipple. Tore it off. Now, they can use her blood as lubrication. The cut-up girl starts squealing, won't stop, so the host and a few other guys tie her up. Then he goes to the painting. He rubs his bloody hands all over it. It's called the Ravenous One, right? So he reasons they should feed it. They all saw how the blood soaked into the painting right in front of them, almost as if the canvas was drinking it. They start cutting themselves, because at this point everyone is high as hell and all on the same page. They are all in on this painting, so they start covering it with blood. everywhere, and the painting keeps drinking it. It. A gorbukaki, if you will. The blood soaks through the front but doesn't come through the back, and the cuts start getting deeper and deeper, and that's when the man showed up. He never introduced himself. He was just sitting in the back of the room watching it all. No one had ever seen him before. He explained to the orgy that the painting didn't need blood. It needed a show. It needed entertainment of a very certain variety, and that if they made it happy, it would show them the other side. He knew this, he said, because he had painted it. He had been gone a long time, and he missed his baby. At the urging of this man, they took the tied-up woman from the corner and hung her up from the ceiling like a piñata. They took turns, her with pipes and pieces of wood. The rest of them laid on the floor under her, almost Elizabeth Bathory style, and while her blood just rained down on them. After a while, all her bones were smashed, and she just slipped through the ropes like a fucking octopus and landed in the middle of the blood orgy. And they just kept. The man told them the painting was hungry for the in the dead woman's belly, so they cut her to pieces until they found the inside, which they then smeared onto the painting, which it then fucking ate. I'm not saying this story is 100% accurate. I'm just saying that's the story given to me by a couple different people that were there.
Official records show Ira Dunwich was executed in Slate County Correctional Facility in 1974. In attendance were two men, Jerry Green and Henry Morgan Dempsey. Yes, the man who would soon after become known as Barbed Wire Henry. After the blood orgy in Bel Air, the painting was lost again. 2 years later, it was reportedly found in Prague and seized by customs agents. The next few years are filled with stories from all over Europe. The painting made its rounds of occult circles in the Eastern Bloc. And then in 1988, it reappeared closer to home in spectacular fashion. A film crew had gone into the Devil's Triangle to shoot footage for a horror movie based on local legend. 2 boats, 7 people, vanished for 11 days. One survivor was found, actor Nick Braithwaite, covered in the blood of his shipmates and that of several other people. He was nearly catatonic from blood loss, shock, and dehydration. He had been extensively tortured. No one else was accounted for. The painting had not been on the boat when it left the coast of Florida, but when authorities found it, the Ravenous One was below deck. It was back in the United States, and by this point, there was enough lore about it that legitimate art galleries and museums wanted to display it. At first, offers came pouring in. But after the second incident of violence at a public viewing of the painting, it disappeared from the public eye. Art expert Booker Collins has been a feature on Antiques Roadshow for half a decade, giving appraisals for rare paintings. Many years before, however, he had a much different job, authenticating art pieces involved with crimes. There was one instance where he was asked to consult on a murder investigation. It turned out to be the last time he would ever work with authorities.
Of course, the police did not believe the painting was evil. How foolish! But due to the painting's history, since they had it in evidence, they decided to have it appraised with fresh eyes. They wanted me to see what, if anything, was different or unusual about it. One of the agents told me his pet theory was that the paints were laced with LSD, and when people touched it with bare skin, they got dosed. That seemed ridiculous, but I still checked for it. I checked for a lot of things. Everything I could think of. I ended up spending several days working with the Ravenous One. And not without cause. The painting was mesmerizing. I would catch myself just zoning out while I stared at it. I've never said this to anyone before, but I was even dreaming of the painting when I went home at night. At the end, I chalked this up to being spooked by the ghost stories. All the case history of the painting demonstrated insane people becoming obsessed, and I think subconsciously it made me become a bit obsessed as well. But not without cause, I assure you. The spectral analysis was inconclusive, which alone was perplexing. But the stop-motion camera and the computer mapping was the truly intriguing part. Please, bear in mind the technology then was primitive compared to now. We mapped out the image, the thickness of the paint, on every square millimeter of it. We also aimed a digital camera on it to take a picture every minute and feed them into the computer. And I found that the painting changed. It never moved. That needs to be clear. The paint was just different in various pictures. I asked to take the painting to my own house, to my personal lab for study, but was denied. I was told that some years ago, another authenticator had done the same thing, and then disappeared. But I was so obsessed I couldn't take no for an answer, so I cut out a small piece of the canvas, just a sliver, to take with me. I've thought about 100 times since then, and for the life of me I can't tell you why I did it. I don't know what I was planning to do. I found myself just staring at it, holding it up. I left it on my nightstand at night, but carried it in my pocket when I went back to the lab. I thought I would get in trouble for damaging evidence, but that never happened, because the painting was not missing a piece the next day. The sliver I had cut out was covered with a flawless patch, like it had scabbed over. That was my last day with the painting. I had reached the end of what I could learn, and the fact I couldn't figure out what was going on, it really started to eat me up. I knew the painting was bad for me, so I signed off on the case file with everything I had learned, and that was that. That night, I was having a quick drink when I noticed someone on the edge of my property. He was staring at the house. He saw me looking and walked away. The next morning when I went to my car, the same man was back, wearing the same clothes. He looked deranged. Perhaps that was just the box cutter, though. He said it over and over, all while he was cutting me. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have done that. He held me on the ground and cut the back of my shoulder. He actually ripped away a piece of my flesh. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have done that. I woke up in the hospital. When I saw a picture of the wound, I could clearly see that the long, thin sliver he had carved out of me matched up to the piece I had taken from the painting. I cut it, and it cut me right back.
Granted, few of these stories are officially verifiable, but the sheer preponderance of evidence gives them weight. Regardless of the details or any possible explanation, natural or otherwise, there is very obviously something wrong with this painting. It's just an object, a piece of art, but the connection to so many horrific events can't be pure chance. The painting is often described as if it moves, but cannot be seen moving. The patterns on the canvas changed but never seemed to be in motion. So it was with the painting itself. It appeared place after place in different circumstances, but it was always found. All of these reports are people finding it. No one ever sees it move. It just appears in a new place. It moves without moving. It was in federal custody in 1996 when Booker examined it, but then in 1999, it appeared at another crime scene, this one at a government office in Philadelphia. It was allegedly a regional office for the DRO, although that has never officially been confirmed. One of the conference rooms had been gutted and turned into a dark cathedral with an altar set up under the painting on the wall. It appeared that blood sacrifices had been made on that altar. There were 13 bodies recovered from that scene. According to a discredited eyewitness account, the painting was taken from there by a federal agent and a priest. It was never logged into evidence for any law enforcement agency. Once again, it just disappeared. Until 2016. For almost 20 years, there are no news stories about this painting, no confirmed encounters. No one knows where it went or who might have been hiding it. But in its absence, the legend only grew. Then it returned, sent to TV painter Rory Silk, who believed it to be a gift from a fan. Before he disappeared, Rory made one last stop. Devin and Layla Witter are owners of the Gladstone Collection, a small art gallery. Rory Silk brought the Ravenous One to them just days before the police started looking for him. He left the painting in their care, knowing this was a safe place.
We actually had the painting in our gallery for a couple of weeks. Never on the floor, of course.
Rory Silk brought the painting by for us to appraise for him. And that was a few days before the unpleasantness.
No one was really sure what happened. He disappeared. The police found some weird stuff in his house, I think.
But it's not like he killed anyone.
Well, he might have. He probably did. I think they found blood.
The police came by. We told them what we knew. They told us to hold on to the painting just in case they needed it for evidence.
They never did come back.
So we're stuck with this thing. I mean, I know it's a painting, but it's not like any painting I've ever seen.
I hated it. Gave me the creeps. I wouldn't even go into the same room with it.
When you were around it, you had to look at it. It was...
Magnetic?
Yeah. That's the word, magnetic. And if you were next to it, if I was next to it, I just had to look at it. I'm not exaggerating.
He's not. It's the truth.
I looked at it a lot. If the shop was empty, I would just go in the back and look at it until someone came in. It wasn't healthy. I can see that now.
You didn't see it then, did you?
It's true. Thanks a lot for pointing that one out, sweetie. Look, I've never had a problem with drugs or alcohol, and I don't smoke. So I can't claim that I understand addiction firsthand, but I remember the way I needed to go look at it, the painting. And that feels like addiction to me.
He still has nightmares about it.
I wouldn't say that.
I would. Anyway, that couple of weeks got a bit strange at times.
For the both of us.
So we came to the agreement that we needed to get rid of it, so we decided to send it to an auction house.
I'm still not sure that was entirely legal.
I have no regrets, especially after what happened.
At the time, our apartment was right above the gallery. And I can admit now that I had been sneaking down at night to go look at the painting. at this point, I'm pretty sure that the thing had started to, talk to me. But it's all kind of hazy.
I wake up one night because he's going downstairs. So I got up and I follow him. I followed him into the back room of the gallery, and there we saw him.
Rory Silk.
He was naked as the day he was born. He was all glistening with saliva.
Well, his own saliva, because...
Do you mind? I was just getting there.
Sorry. Go ahead.
He had laid the painting on the floor, and he was licking it. He was rubbing his body all over the canvas and licking it, almost like he was making love to it.
And he was dragging his teeth along the thickest part of the paint, like scratching little flakes off of it, which he was eating.
After that, we felt kind of bad about sending it to the auction house. I mean, we did it still, but we had to get rid of it. And I felt bad about not telling them about all of the saliva.
Doesn't matter now, does it?
Suppose not.
Well, the upshot is that the auction house burned down the night after they received the painting. There, but for the grace of God, go we.
Amen.
After the auction house fire, there is no further record of the painting. Sightings have been reported, but they are dubious at best, and not embraced even by the most ardent occult supporter. It would seem the Ravenous One is gone, at least until the next time it comes back. Thank you for listening to another episode of A Scary Home Companion. Music for this episode comes from Devil Music with A Woman's Decision. And as always, Chelsea Oxendine gave us our theme music. Expert production and editing by Jeff Davidson, and our executive producer is Nathaniel Hensley. You can contact us at ascaryhomecompanion@gmail.com or on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We'd like to thank our patrons, but they got an uncensored version of this episode early, so they probably aren't listening. If that makes you jealous at all, go to patreon.com and join them. Guest voices for this episode by fellow podcasters Ben Dolin from Extreme Horror Replay, Josh and Amanda from Super Familiar with the Wilsons, and Scott Taft of Budget Arcade.
From the ashes of the Extreme Horror Replay podcast comes Gorehead. The Gorehead podcast. The most extreme horror films for the most extreme horror fans.
Hi, I'm Amanda.
And I'm Josh.
And we are super familiar with the Wilsons. We're just two people who like to talk, listen, and miss being social. We started this podcast as a way to connect with others during an isolating time.
We interview interesting people, we play fun games, we get real about living, parenting, and marriage, and sometimes we eat really hot or disgusting things, or hot and disgusting things.
We can't have you all over for a dinner party, so this is the next best thing.
So find our new episodes every Monday wherever you listen to podcasts, and search for Super Familiar with the Wilsons.
Bye.
If you love games, but hate paying for games, Budget Arcade is the podcast you've been looking for. Every week, the hosts play, review, and break down the best and worst in free-to-play games. Budget Arcade. Available everywhere you find podcasts.